Okay folks, we're in Boone County. We're just down from the Blomgren seed office. We're going to do a quick scouting tutorial for corn rootworm. I'm with technical agronomist Todd Clausen.
Hey, good morning. It is about 9 a.m. It's June 28th. It's Wednesday. Going to get really hot this afternoon. We're in the field. This is shovel. Okay, we use it to dig plants out of the ground. This is corn on corn. This is DKC 6188, so it does have a single trait below ground to control corn rootworm. But a corn on corn, with the type of season that we've had, we're concerned whether or not we've got any root damage or issues below ground with corn rootworm larvae, because we've got a lot of larvae in the countryside, a lot of corn rootworm in the countryside, and we're just taking a look to see what type of pressure we might have on any given farm. So I pulled the root ball up. I'm shaking the dirt off. It's awful dry because we're not sticking to it very much. But I've got a pretty good overall crown set. I've got roots coming down, and obviously I didn't dig all the way around it, but your root systems are getting probably 25 to 30 inches deep. My brace roots, here's my 7th brace roots, here's my 6th node of brace roots. And so now I've got the roots out, and I'm looking for scarring. I'm looking for any type of discoloration on the root themselves, because that's going to indicate the feeding. Because remember, this is a protein that's being produced by the plant, and the larvae have to feed to die. And so generally I just stick the plant underneath my arm and I start to pull roots apart. So I split roots apart, and I'm looking for any type of tunneling. And that one I don't. Sean and I did just previously dig up a plant that did have a little bit of scarring and some tunneling in it. But overall you can see that this root system's in fine shape, and I'm not getting much feeding on it. Okay, so now generally what we'll do is we'll pull these plants out, we'll take them from the field, and I'll drop them in a bucket of water. And we're going to show you that here shortly. And then we'll take them back to a site and we'll rinse them off with a hose or even a power washer to get a better indication of what type of pressure I have. Because you know, we're in corn on corn, and a single trait or a single mode of action is really not going to be acceptable for much longer because of the type of pressure that we have from corn rootworm. So we're going to have to be looking at having a trait, a single trait with an insecticide, or multiple traits below ground to control corn rootworm. And actually, as you can see, our roots inside are really pretty healthy. So what we're going to do next is we are going to shut this down. We're going to show you some plants that we have dug up that are refuge, and 2 different trait packages under some heavier pressure. But this is basically how we do it. We dig it up, we look for scarring, and I'm going to score this really well. So this plant's in great shape. All right, we'll catch up to you after we have plants in a bucket. Thanks.
Alright, hey folks, we're back. We're in the warehouse at the Blomgren seed office. I'm back with Todd Clausen. We've got some plants pulled. We've got some good pressure to look at, and Todd, why don't you tell us what we're seeing?
All right, so we pulled plants out of a farm, multiple year corn on corn, and like we were talking about out in the field, we drop those in a bucket, and you'll get the rootworm to float. Now here it is, it's June 27th, and what you see on my fingertip are 3 different pupa from western corn rootworm larvae. And actually you can see him, he's just beginning pupation, this guy is. These 2, as you can see, are already bound up. Now they're going to be in this pupa stage for a number of days yet, and then they're going to emerge as corn rootworm beetle. Okay, so these are really pretty cool, but it's June 27th, man. We are way ahead of a normal time frame for the pest in this stage. So I put them in a bucket, and I've got 3 different products here, and so I've got 3 different traits. So basically I've got my untreated, so I've got no below ground trait in this plant I'm holding in my hands. Now also understand that these are 3 separate and different pedigrees, but they came out of the same farm, and what I want to illustrate is the differential of pressure and the different type of control. So let's tear this down a little bit, and I'll show you what I'm looking at is roots. So here's my crown area where my hand is. So I've got secondary and tertiary root hairs. And really, I've watched this farm for a number of days now, and I'm getting regeneration of roots. Here's my 6th node of brace roots, and then here's my 7th node. Now, and you see it's all on one side. Well, as you can see, let me flip this right side up. It was already leaning. So this side's closer to the ground. The closer to the ground, the stem recognizes, and that's the direction the brace roots are going to form. Brace roots are also going to come out of this node. But as I look at this plant, I tuck it under my arm, and look at how the rootworm have just annihilated these root tissues and these root stems. I mean, I'm burnt all the way back. So I've lost 1 full ring of nodes. So I'm going to rate this about a 2.2 or 2.3, and that's pretty heavy feeding. Okay, but that's untreated, no protection whatsoever outside of normal seed treatment, which is going to be low rate of an insecticide on that treatment, the 250 level. Okay, so that is untreated. My second product is coming out with a single trait below ground. This is VT3. So it has a single trait that produces a protein that will control corn rootworm larvae upon expression. And I've got a little bit of scarring, as I can see scarring right here, scarring up and down this root tissue, because remember, these larvae have to feed to die. Now if I pull these apart, we didn't find any out in the field when we were just out there, but this field I know is hot, so as I pull these roots apart, you can see that there's been some tunneling, some scarring, but overall I've got pretty decent control. And where I've lost some control is in part of the crown and in some of the secondary roots. But these are extremely important, these little roots here, because it's the tip of the root that has your absorption power. So the more roots I have, the more tips I have. But you can see it's had some feeding on it, but it's holding fairly well. But compare it to untreated, no trait, single trait. Now as I move to one last product that was in the field, has 2 traits below ground. You can see I've got more of a firm, full crown all the way around this system. I've protected the crown area itself, and so I've got a much fuller base below this plant. And I just pulled these at random. So I've got single trait compared to 2 traits, single trait, 2 traits, and then compare it to untreated all the way around. So if you pull that over here, you can see the same 3 plant intact. No trait on these 2. You can see the type of root ball that came up with these. And then the second 2, different plants at random. That came out of your driveway. Oh, don't forget this. And then look again at your multiple traits, at 2 traits below ground, and you can see what type of control that you want to get. Lastly, I'm concerned about beetle pressure, corn rootworm beetle pressure. And these have been in the back of my truck for about an hour and a half, and I don't see any beetles on them, but I know they've been here, because as I open this leaf up, see the scarring? So the beetle, they are silk feeders, but when there are no silk out, they will scar and they will eat the chlorophyll out of this tissue. This creates damage. This also creates secondary entry wounds for fungi and bacteria. But the other thing is, when the silk do pop out, where are all these beetles going to go? They're going to go right to that silk. So I think you're going to have to think about protection. You're going to have to think about an insecticide to control these beetles so they don't inundate and clip your silk and cause issues with pollination. So there we are. We've got 3 different avenues. We've got untreated, we have single trait, and we have 2 traits below ground. And you can see the differential with these type of products and the control we're getting. So, hey, at Blomgren Seed, I'm Todd Clausen, technical agronomist with the Calvin Asgrow. Thanks.
All right, folks. So you've just been with us. We've shown you how to scout for corn rootworm. We've shown you how to rinse the plants. We've compared some products. We've seen different modes of action to combat with corn rootworm. What we're going to do now is kind of have a conversation about where we're at and where we're headed. So I'm going to ask Todd to speak to what things have led us to the point where we're at today.
Well, and what we're talking about is the corn rootworm pressure, because that's our topic today. So how have we gotten the pressure that we're seeing today is, because it's heavy. If you go out there in another, we'll call it 2 and 3 weeks, we already have beetle emerging. Today is June 27th, and it's really early, 1, to have this much larva pressure, but 2, to have this many beetles flying. Now, and several things that have alluded to this or brought us to this point. You've got 2 species that are prevalent here in the state of Iowa. One's the northern corn rootworm species, the other is the western. They both have evolved. So the northern corn rootworm species, back all the way to 2000, the year 2000, had begun a phenomenon known as extended diapause. So the rootworm beetle lay eggs in the cornfield where they're at right now. Okay? Those eggs didn't 100% hatch the next year in a full rotation when that farm went to beans. Their gestation period carried over to the following year when you went back to corn. Okay, so that's causing me some issue there. The other species is the western corn rootworm, and it started in the Illinois area and the Mississippi River Valley, is where it's known as the western corn rootworm variant, whereby it's confirmed that these beetles are laying eggs in soybean fields. We know that. So that's increasing the pressure. Also, how many millions of acres of corn do we have this year? Which means how many corn on corn acres that we have. So our corn on corn has risen. Both of the evolution of the 2 different species is causing us problems. What about things like volunteer corn? Anybody got volunteer corn out there? You got to see what the corn rootworm pressure is in volunteer corn in soybean fields. So you're going to get survival of rootworm and evolution of rootworm in soybean fields. So our pressure is high. You think about it, and how I rate pressure is I look for corn rootworm beetle. If I have 1 beetle per plant, 1 beetle, that justifies treatment or economic threshold to control larvae for the next year. So beetle that you're finding right now, if you have 1 per plant, that justifies enough pressure to economically treat for corn rootworm the next year. Well, we're running 10 to 20 beetle per plant, so we're 10 to 20-fold the pressure. So if I have 20 beetle per plant and I control 90% of them, I still have 2 times the pressure or 2 times the threshold. So we're heavy pressure, period.
How much of what we're seeing this June 27th is related to current climate conditions? Obviously, we're significantly dry, we're hot. Here in Boone County, we've had very few rains. We've had some critically timed ones, but we don't have the regular moisture. If I asked you, do I have significantly more pressure today than I did a year ago at this date, how much of that is weather related and how much of that is a trend line where we're going up with our corn rootworm pressure?
Yeah, the answer is yes. 1, there's greater pressure than a year ago. How much of it can be divided between the 2 avenues that you just talked about, I can't tell you exactly. I can't tell you even relatively. But what we do know is your environmental factors have created a lot of pressure. If you go back to the last couple of weeks on our Monday morning alerts, we were talking about rootless corn syndrome. Mm-hmm. All right, so now I've got rootless corn syndrome. I have maybe 1/3 of the root system that I should have. Well, that puts pressure on the remaining roots that are on that plant. The other thing, we've been extremely dry. There's an input that I think most of you use out there. It's called nitrogen. And now, think about nitrogen is the basis for all amino acids, which give rise to the proteins, which are the toxins that control corn rootworm and traded products.
Yep.
All right, so if I have less moisture, I have rootless corn syndrome, how much nitrogen am I taking up? A lot less. So without that nitrogen load, I'm also producing less toxin. In theory, I would be producing less toxin. So the dry conditions escalate this situation. It's also escalated rootless corn syndrome, but don't confuse the 2. You can't confuse corn rootworm pressure with rootless corn because they're 2 separate things, but one can lend to the other issue, and it has.
So where I want to go from here, so if my field is the one that we just scouted where we saw some significant corn rootworm pressure, let's talk about 2 avenues. The first being, I'm here today, Wednesday, June 27th. I'm right before or right at the beginning of tassel. I have known heavy corn rootworm pressure. What am I going to do to treat for that in the here and now? I'd like to start with that and then go to a conversation about what management decisions are we going to make going into the 2013 growing season. So today, it's Wednesday, June 27th. What's your recommendation to me on a corn where I'm seeing heavy rootworm pressure?
Well, you've got heavy beetle pressure out there today. They're scarring up the leaf tissue because they're silk feeders.
Yep.
But without silk, they're feeding on the chlorophyll on the leaf tissue. What happens when your silk come out? Where are they going to go? They're going to go right to those silks. So we are, well, the farm we were just in is about 2.5 leaves from tassel. Today's June 27th. By Monday or Tuesday of next week, that farm's going to be in full tassel. Yep. Silk are going to be out. A farm that has 3 to 4 to 5 beetle per plant are going to have issues with that silk clipping. And if I'm clipping silk, I'm going to have trouble pollinating and fertilizing those embryos that end up being kernels. So short term, that's a concern. And if you're a fungicide user on corn, you may need to move that application up just slightly out in front of silking and then use an insecticide load with it.
So I have the ability, we spray here on our own farm, we spray our fungicide with a ground grid.
Yeah.
We have the ability to go out, whenever we want to do that. So I'm going to go out earlier. I'm going to lead with my fungicide. Your recommendation is mix an insecticide in my tank when I go out and do that, and probably run that fungicide application with my insecticide a little earlier.
Run them together, but remember these fungicides have labels from V8 up through tassel time, but it's a non-oil adjuvant load. So it's product and water. So in that ground rig, which is a great option, you're going to have water, fungicide, insecticide. Period. And I'd be pulling that trigger 1.5 leaf before the tassel pops out. So it's time. It's almost time to go.
Great. So in the here and now, I'm going to run my fungicide with my insecticide. I'm going to head pretty soon on that. That's going to be something we're going to get to pretty quickly. Let's talk about, we get through this growing season. We know the pressure we have. We know what we're seeing. We've just scouted it. What are you thinking about going into 2013? If I'm in an environment where I need corn on corn, I don't really have the option to rotate away, what are the things we need to take into consideration?
Corn on corn, really, in my own opinion, my perspective, from this day forward, we don't run with single modes of action. Okay. So for corn rootworm, I'm going to use 2 modes of action. So I'll use a product with a single trait below ground to control corn rootworm, in addition to a soil applied insecticide, whether it be a granular, whether it be a liquid, or even if it's a high rate of a seed treatment. They all have different levels of consistency and efficacy, but 2 modes of action. The other opportunity, then, you can run products that have 2 traits for below ground control of corn rootworm larvae. So Smart Stacks that carries 2 separate and full single doses of protein that control corn rootworm larvae. So those are 2 modes of action. So I've got a Smart Stacks type of product, 2 modes below ground, or if I'm going 1 mode, then I've got to have a secondary mode of action, and really your best option then is insecticide. Great.
Great, guys. We're not going to talk too specifically to specific brands and specific products, but obviously if you have questions about fungicide or insecticide use, please reach out to us, and especially as we talk about the different options available in corn going forward. We've got a great lineup of Smart Stacks headed our way, which are going to be, I think, a critical piece to this puzzle as we look at corn on corn next year. So appreciate your time today. Thanks for the investment, and Todd, thank you.
Thanks, man.
Look forward to next year.